"Stop making things about you," my son said as I handed him a gift. So I did. I made it about the $8.80 he thought was his. He didn't know what a quiet signature could take away. I arrived at the hall that afternoon as though wearing an invisible shroud, the red carpet stretching before me like a road through memory and regret. Everywhere polished surfaces glittered under crystal chandeliers. Elegant women in silk and tulle whispered and giggled, their heels clicking a silent melody that felt mocking under my feet. At 68, I had not thought to dress for their glare, only to gather my courage and step into the bright room. In my hands I held the small, silver-wrapped box. Nothing extravagant, no diamonds or ribbons, just a modest gift I had prepared painstakingly. Within it lay a hand-stitched handkerchief, its edges frayed from hours of embroidery. Each careful stitch recalled nights spent soothing Michael's fever as a child. Stolen pennies spent on his braces instead of warmth for myself, worshipful prayers spoken into the dark that he might one day take flight. Folded quietly beneath that cloth was the real gift, a legal document, neatly folded, heavy with consequence. I had chosen the linen and thread for comfort and tradition, but the paper carried truth, silent and binding. I had felt my heart twist and settle as I walked in, the silver box too little, the wedding too grand. Yet I raised my hand, stepping forward, determined that at least the truth would be offered. My son's voice cut through the swirl of soft music and polite applause without mercy. "Stop making things about you. This is my day, not yours." The words landed flat and final. I stared at him. Michael, my child, the boy I had carried through spring blossoms and first steps, looking upon me as an annoyance, a background shade. I felt heat rise in my ears, and I thought briefly of leaving. Before we continue, if this story's hitting your heart or firing you up, hit that hype button right now. Let's boost the power of every silent voice that's ever been ignored. But something held me. The quiet resolution of every night when he had not come home. The years when I had held his face in my hands, whispering encouragement, shame, remembering him as he used to be. Before I could retract my hand, Jessica, sleek in ivory and disdain, snatched the box from me. Her nails dug into the silver paper, tearing its shine into crumpled segments. She laughed, a sharp pop of triumph, and addressed the guests as though giving a performance. What could this old hag possibly give? Mothballs and pity? The words echoed and bounced off the marble, gathering cruel momentum. The guests laughed, and one of them lifted a phone to record it, the screen lighting up with my trembling face. Jessica's hand jerked the lid off, revealing the handkerchief. I could almost hear the sound of my heart stopping inside me as she let out another cruel laugh and reached for a ceremonial pair of scissors from the side, draped with ribbon meant for cutting a decorative cord. She gripped the handles and held them aloft, the steel blades glinting. "Let me make it more valuable," she declared in a tone that made my skin crawl, as if turning my offering into trash was high entertainment. In a swift, savage motion, she sliced the cloth into tatters, the lace separated into threads, the embroidery unraveling like a wound. Beneath the shredded fragments, the envelope tumbled free, its edges soft and folded, almost registering to the floor, then forgotten in the middle of the mockery. The cloth lay in ruin, the pencil of thread and silk scattered, and the envelope, my heart, unseen. The room erupted in laughter, applause, catcalls. I stood frozen. The phone in the hand of a laughing guest recorded it all. I could feel its flash against my chest, as cold and accusatory as the voice that had cut me down. And then Michael turned harshly to the photographer, red-faced and flush with disdain. "Delete every photo with her. She's not family. She's nothing." The sentence was punctuated by a camera click, and the front of the camera went black. I smelled the faint hint of perfume and sweat. The scent of panic and triumph mingled. No one attempted to stop Jessica. No one offered a hand to help me. I realized then that I was utterly alone, discarded like debris from a day they felt entitled to shine in. So I stood, perfectly still. I took in the stripe of light across her cheek, the smirk curving on her lips, the way the applause continued, as if nothing had just happened. I saw clearly the polished look in the guests' eyes, as though I were the interloper in a comedy that I had not auditioned for. My throat ached, but I did not cry. I did not speak. There was a crescendo of laughter and the low hum of whispers. I recognized the moment for what it was. A line crossed, dignity torn, memories mocked. The handkerchief lay in pieces at my feet, symbols of every sacrifice, every silent prayer. But inside me, something else stirred. It was not weakness that held me in place, but something infinitely steadier. Remembrance. The long labor of love that could never truly be torn apart. My knees quivered only once, then steadied. I wanted to feel whole again. I pressed my palm against the cool marble floor to hold myself upright, and in that brief, still moment, the shame, the pain, the humiliation condensed. Then, like fuel meeting flame, resolve ignited. I would not leave. I would not beg. They thought they had erased me, but they had only set me alight. A slow, steady fire lit in my bones, hot and real. I looked down at the shredded fragments around me and knew the truth. I might be frayed, but I was not broken. You shouldn't have underestimated me, I said quietly, almost to myself, because the most powerful flame is the one that burns in silence. And I would kindle from these ashes a story they would regret igniting. Kennedy's laughter trailed off behind me. Michael turned away, his chin raised, but I was no longer shrinking. I had stepped into the promise of my own retaliation. Serene and inevitable, I walked out of that spotlight, leaving behind my tatters and stepping into what I would become. They say time softens pain. Whoever said that never had to raise a child alone, while the world watched them struggle and still called them selfish. My husband Raymond passed away when Michael was 6. One morning, he went out to check the mailbox, and by the time I came outside to remind him to put his coat on, he was slumped against the post. His body still warm, but his breath gone. A heart attack, the doctor said. Sudden, final. I still remember how tightly Michael held my hand at the funeral, how he kept whispering, "We'll be okay, right, Mommy?" And I told him yes, even when I had no idea how that would be true. We had nothing, just a rented apartment and a beat-up Buick with a heater that coughed more than it worked. I was a nurse's aide at the time, barely above minimum wage. But I worked. I worked like the devil was on my heels. I took double shifts, sometimes triples. There were weeks when I slept only in the break room and came home just long enough to put food in the fridge and check Michael's homework. I missed birthdays, school plays, parent-teacher nights, but I also paid off every lunch bill. I bought every winter coat. I never let that boy go to sleep cold or hungry. When he was 12, he wrote an essay about me for school. The prompt was, "Who is your hero?" I found the paper folded under his pillow, damp from where he'd fallen asleep on it. He'd written, in crooked block letters, "My mom is my hero because she works more than anyone and still makes me dinner. She doesn't wear a cape, but she saves lives, and she saved mine." I kept that paper in my Bible for years, until it yellowed and cracked. I used to reread it when my bones ached too much to get out of bed. Michael was bright. Always was. Top of his class in science. I remember once, he built a model of the solar system with styrofoam and toothpicks, and stayed up all night painting Saturn's rings. I couldn't afford the expensive kits the other kids had, but he didn't complain. He made do. That's how we lived. I saved for years so he could go to college. When his acceptance letter came from the University of Michigan, I sold the last piece of jewelry I owned, my wedding ring. It bought his dorm deposit and textbooks for the first semester. I cried when I handed it to the pawn shop clerk. He thought it was because I missed my husband. That was only part of it. The other part was knowing that I was giving up the last token of a life I used to have, for the future of a life I had built from scratch. Michael was grateful, at first. He called every Sunday. He sent me postcards. He thanked me at Thanksgiving. But slowly, things shifted. The more he achieved, the more distant he became. He started using words like legacy and image. He talked about how he wanted to belong in rooms filled with ambition and power, not pity and sacrifice. He stopped mentioning his childhood altogether, like it was something he needed to unlearn. That was around the time Jessica came along. She was beautiful, poised, articulate, the kind of woman who wore heels that never scuffed and lipsticks that matched her handbags. But behind her gloss there was calculation. She was a nurse at the private hospital where Michael interned. I remember the first time he brought her home. She smiled politely, but her eyes scanned my kitchen like it was a crime scene. She complimented the casserole I made, but didn't take a second bite. A few weeks later, Michael asked if I could help Jessica with her nursing school tuition. She had taken out loans, but they weren't enough, and she couldn't afford to keep her car. I didn't hesitate. I pulled from my emergency fund money I'd been setting aside for home repairs, for retirement. I wired it without asking for anything in return. Jessica sent me a 2-lyric thank you email that ended with, "Hope to see you at the wedding." But I never did get an invitation. That first wedding was in Vegas, a spur-of-the-moment elopement. I saw the photos on Facebook a week later. Michael wore a rented tux. Jessica wore white, holding a bouquet of orchids. There were no parents in the pictures, just friends and filtered hashtags. Power couple, from rags to, rich as I tried not to be hurt. I told myself they were young, busy, focused on their careers, but I started noticing the pattern. I wasn't invited to the housewarming party, or Jessica's promotion dinner, or their first anniversary celebration at the vineyard. Each time, I found out after the fact, usually from a neighbor or an old friend who saw it on social media. When I gently asked Michael about it, he said, "We're trying to build a different kind of life, Mom. One that's not weighed down by the past." Weighed down. That was the phrase that gutted me. I was no longer a root, just an anchor. An inconvenient reminder of struggle. Jessica made it clear she didn't want me around. She once said, when they were hosting a charity gala for her hospital, "Don't invite her, she lowers the tone. This is a black tie event, not a church potluck." I heard her say it. She didn't know I was on the other end of the line when she said it to Michael, and he didn't correct her. He just sighed and said, "You're right. I should have pulled away then. I should have protected what little pride I had left. But that's not what mothers do." I kept showing up. I sent cards. I knitted baby clothes, even when I knew Jessica would buy Burberry instead. I dropped off baked goods at their doorstep and rang the bell, knowing no one would answer. I stayed late after church to pray for them, until my knees ached on the pew. They didn't want my love, but I gave it anyway. Not because I thought it would change them, but because I needed to know I had done everything I could. When Jessica announced they were planning a second wedding, an official one, this time with all the glitz and pageantry, I hoped, foolishly, that I would be part of it. I bought a simple pale mauve dress and started working on the handkerchief. I stitched it by the light of my kitchen window, each flower an initial carved in thread like a prayer. I included a note, folded neatly and tucked inside the cloth. For all the days I wasn't there and all the ones I never left. I love you, Mom. That was the note they never saw. The note she cut through with her golden scissors, laughing. I do not know what hurt more, the slicing of cloth or the slicing of memory. Perhaps they were the same. Jessica didn't just cut a gift. She cut the years. She cut the stories. She cut the mother out of the boy. And Michael? He didn't even flinch. He used to call me his hero. Now he called me deadweight. I should have known better than to step forward. But some part of me, some fragile, foolish part, still believed I belonged in the picture. The photographer was calling for family photos. That was the cue. Parents, siblings, close relations. I waited until the crowd shifted, until I saw Michael standing with Jessica beneath the flower arch. My legs trembled, not from age, but from the awareness that this was a risk. Still, I took a step forward, then another. My pale jubal dress fluttered against my ankles as I walked toward the stage. I clutched the remains of the gift box, empty now, useless to anyone but me. A fragment of the handkerchief, cut clean through, still poked from the paper like a wounded flag. The photographer, a young man with a headset and a clipboard, didn't notice me at first. Neither did Michael. But Jessica did. Her head snapped toward me, eyes narrowing. She hissed something to her bridesmaid, then turned back with a smirk. I stepped up to the first riser, one foot, then the other. That's when I heard it. Michael's voice. Cold, sharp, no warmth left. "Stay in the back," he snapped. "Don't you dare ruin this." I stopped in my tracks. My son, my boy who once held my hand in grocery stores, who called me Mommy longer than he wanted his friends to know, looked at me as though I were a stranger trying to steal the spotlight. The photographer looked confused. "Ma'am, are you—" "She's nobody," Jessica cut in. "She's just the help. She looks like a maid." The words hit like slaps. She should sit with the catering staff, she laughed, and a few others chuckled along, not because it was funny, but because that's what people do when the rich and powerful mock someone. They laugh to be included. I felt the heat rise in my cheeks. I stepped back, trying not to tremble. That's when someone from Jessica's bridal party lifted a phone and said, laughing, "Old hag crashed the wedding. LOL, this is gonna go viral." I saw the red light of the camera flicker. It was live. I turned to go, but in the rush of retreat, someone brushed against me. No, not brushed. Shoved. A hard hand against my shoulder, sending me stumbling sideways. I couldn't catch myself fast enough. My ankle twisted, and I fell, not hard but humiliatingly. My knees hit the floor. The silver paper crumpled beneath me, and one of the cut fragments of the handkerchief floated to the ground like an autumn leaf. I heard gasps, then laughter. Always laughter. For a long moment, I did not move. I stared at the memento, now torn and discarded, at the fragments of thread I had sewn with tired eyes and hopeful hands. The pain in my knee was sharp, but the pain in my chest was worse. I saw the feet around me shuffle backward, no one helping, no one speaking. I was on the ground, and to them that was exactly where I belonged. Jessica's voice cut through again. "We said black tie, not thrift store chic." I could have wept, but I didn't. I could have screamed, but I didn't. Instead, I did the one thing none of them expected. I smiled. Not out of joy, not out of madness, but because something inside me had clicked into place, cold, clear, and absolute. I reached down and began picking up the shredded fabric. Every thread, every piece of ruined linen, and then, with slow precision, I found it. The envelope. It had survived. Torn at the corner, maybe smudged from where it had been trampled, but the paper itself was intact. I slid it back into the crumpled gift box, folded it twice, and tucked it under my arm. I stood. No one offered a hand. No one looked at me with anything but disgust, or worse, amusement. But I stood. And in that moment, I felt something ancient stir inside me. Not anger, not even grief. Power. Because now they had shown the world who they truly were. And I had kept quiet long enough. The wedding resumed like nothing had happened. I had returned to my seat at the back corner of the hall, the gift box beside me, my hands folded in my lap like a quiet prayer. My knees still ached from the fall, and my cheek was warm from the sting of shame. But inside, something else had begun to burn, steady, cold, and exact. The band started playing again. Guests clinked champagne glasses. The photographer adjusted his lens as if the scene hadn't just included a woman left crumpled on the ground. Then the lights flickered. Just once. Then again. Then everything went dark. Gasps spread across the room. A second later, the music stopped. A confused hush fell over the crowd. For a moment, only candlelight and the clinking of nervous silverware filled the space. Jessica's voice broke through first. "What the hell is happening?" she snapped, spinning around in her heels. "Where's the staff?" A man in a white jacket, one of the caterers, walked briskly across the room. Another followed, then another, trays in hand, heads down, moving toward the exit. They're leaving?" someone whispered. That's when I saw him. Lawrence Thompson, my lawyer. He wasn't dressed for a party. Dark gray suit, old briefcase in hand, walking calmly through the now silent hall like a conductor approaching the podium before a symphony. "Excuse me," he said, his voice gentle but firm. "I'm sorry to interrupt. I know this is meant to be a celebration, but I have a few urgent disclosures that must be made before the evening continues." Michael's face went pale. "What is this?" Jessica hissed. "Who is that man?" "Mr. Thompson," I said, standing slowly, my voice clear. "You may proceed." He nodded, opened his case, and pulled out a folder marked with a red ribbon. "Effective this morning," he began. "Mrs. Margaret Elkins, formerly listed on all financial documents as a silent benefactor, has withdrawn support from the following contractual obligations: the rental of this venue, the catering agreement with Fleur and Flame, the photography package with Marcelli Studios, the floral design by Juliet & Co., and the mortgage agreement for the property located at 912 Oakfield Lane." A wave of confusion rippled through the crowd. Jessica blinked. "What is he talking about?" Michael looked at me, finally, truly looked, and for the first time in years, I saw not disdain, but fear. I stepped forward, holding the crumpled gift box in my hands like an offering. "Everything you see here," I said softly, "every string quartet note, every rose petal, every canapé, was paid for by me." The silence was thick. Jessica laughed once, short and sharp. "That's a lie." Lawrence held up the documents. "All payments, down to the last cent, were routed through a trust in Mrs. Elkin's name. She has full discretion to revoke any and all services at will." Jessica's voice rose to a screech. "This is our wedding, you can't just—" "I can," I said, turning toward her. "And I did. This morning, before I left the house, I signed the revocations. And now you get to see what that silence bought you." The overhead lights, already dim, flickered once more and then shut off completely. The floral arrangements, already wilting from the afternoon heat, were gathered unceremoniously by the departing forests. The cake, an elaborate 6-tier monstrosity of fondant and false love, was wheeled away through the back doors. Guests began murmuring, shifting in their chairs. Some stood uncertain. Others began whispering, too loud to be ignored. "She paid for all of this? Wait, she's the mother? Is this a joke?" Michael took a step toward me. "Mom, you didn't have to—" I turned to him, slowly. "Didn't I? You made it clear I was nothing. Now you get to see what nothing really looks like." Jessica was losing composure fast. "You can't just ruin our day." I held up the remnants of the gift box. From it, I pulled the shredded pieces of the handkerchief, careful and slow, letting the fragments catch the light like ashes. "This," I said, holding up the torn cloth, "was stitched with my hands for weeks. I planned to give it to you with love. I tucked a note inside, a promise of support, of legacy, something no money could buy. But you cut through it like it meant nothing." Jessica's eyes darted to the box. "You put money in there?" I smiled, just slightly. "Not money. Something more valuable. The deed to your home, the agreement to pay off your student debt, the contract that gave you this wedding, all hidden in the folds of that fabric, all cut to pieces by your own hand." The room was now utterly still. Someone gasped. Someone else whispered, "No way." Jessica's hands shook. "You tricked us." "No," I said. "I trusted you." Michael looked at me, tears forming in his eyes now. "Mom, please, don't do this." I stepped forward again, closer than I'd been in years. "Do what? Reclaim what I earned? Revoke what I offered in good faith? Or show you what happens when you forget who built the foundation under your feet?" Jessica lunged forward, tried to grab the papers from Lawrence's hands. "You don't get to humiliate us." I raised my hand, stopping her with a single sentence. "This isn't humiliation," I said. "This is clarity." Then I knelt, slowly, deliberately, and gathered the last of the torn handkerchief from the floor. Alongside it, a small scrap of the original letter, enough to make out the words, "I love you, Mom." I stood, looked between the two of them, and said, clear enough for every guest to hear, "This handkerchief is like our relationship, torn, frayed, and no longer mended. And just like this fabric, whatever future you imagined with my help is gone." Jessica collapsed into a chair, sobbing, makeup streaking down her face. Michael tried to steady her, but she shoved him away. The guests were leaving now, one by one. Some looked at me with sympathy, others with awe. A few even clapped, quietly, as they passed. I turned, lifted the box once more, and walked back to my table, where Lily was waiting. When the florist's truck disappeared down the winding driveway and the last of the catering trays turned into a ragged memory, a low murmur of confusion rippled through the gathering. In the sudden emptiness, my pulse thrummed like a war drum. I stood still, poised between the fractured elegance of the once celebratory hall and the raw truth that now permeated the air. I had weaponized silence, secrecy, and stitchwork, but I had another weapon left, one they never suspected. Lawrence opened his briefcase again. The click of its latches sounded brutal in the hush that followed. "Before the evening concludes, there is another matter that must be addressed," he said. He drew out another folder, but this one was thicker than before. The paper felt soft in his hands, but what it carried had the weight of worlds. "Mrs. Margaret Elkins," he began, "has exercised her rights as a founding contributor to Elmwood Engineering, Incorporated." He paused, letting the words settle like dust in the stillness. I watched Michael's face harden. "What are you talking about?" he demanded, voice brittle. Lawrence continued, "Over the past 15 years, Mrs. Elkins has quietly accumulated a controlling majority of shares in Elmwood Engineering through a trust administered by her longtime legal counsel, Mr. Samuel Harris, retired attorney, family friend, witness to years of modest beginnings." The retired lawyer stood from the back row, thin and frail, but unmistakably proud as he lifted his hand in greeting. As of yesterday, at the completion of a previously scheduled board meeting, Mrs. Elkins formally transferred all her shares to the Elmwood Education Foundation, a nonprofit she founded to support girls' STEM scholarships. I could see Michael's skin drain of color. This was no minor betrayal. It was a decapitation. His corporate throne slid out from beneath him as if by ghost hands. Michael's voice cracked. "You can't do this." I stepped forward. The sting of rage was gone. Instead was clarity. "You thought you built this company, Michael, that your ambition and hard work did it alone?" He opened his mouth, then closed it. He'd seen the papers. Everyone had. Still, law and equity must be spoken. Lawrence spoke gently. "The foundation now controls 52% of Elmwood's voting stock. Operational control has been transferred. This was done in accordance with all legal provisions." I watched that brittle smile vanish from Michael's face. He looked as though someone had torn the ground from under his feet. I said, quietly, "You thought you built it. I gave you the bricks. The nights without sleep, the sacrifices nobody ever saw, the savings from my nursing hours that paid for the initial patent application." My voice cracked only once, then resolved into calm steel. "Every salary check you paid yourself was built on the foundation I laid." Jessica staggered to her feet, tears in her eyes that looked like regret for someone else's crime. You tricked us." I reached out, tapping the box I still held. Inside lay the fragments of the handkerchief and that promise note. "No trick," I said, "truth. I trusted you wanted me to be proud of you, but this loyalty was unrequited, discarded." Michael turned, anger and panic colliding in his eyes. "You'll ruin 1,000 careers," I met his gaze unshakable. "I've built a different legacy tonight." The room was quiet except for the hum of headlights beyond the glass doors, of taxis leaving, of guests disappearing. The fall of inherited privilege is a slow unraveling. Watching the security cameras verified that investors had begun pulling funds, that board members were distancing themselves from the scandal. I was aware of all of it, but I stood grounded in the knowledge that the foundation replaced me, not just as a shareholder, but as an architect of values. I glanced at Mr. Harris, who nodded, tears glinting beneath his aged eyes. We had built something that evening, a rebirth of justice. Michael stood in the wreckage of his dreams. Jessica still trembled with disbelief. I walked slowly past them, making sure every step pressed home the weight of what had been undone and what now stood up for renewal. I waited until the last candle guttered out before I spoke again. The sudden darkness, the hushed gasp that rippled through the reservation of guests, those moments were the drumbeat of my triumph. The hall felt seismic, as if the wedding itself had collapsed around me. Not for drama, but for truth. The next morning, the video of Jessica cutting the handkerchief went viral. Before sunrise, it had tens of thousands of views. By lunchtime, it had become a movement. "Couple of the year, more like the cruelest of the year," one TikTok caption said. Another read, "Air and air with hearts of stone." A trending meme showed Jessica's golden scissors dripping red thread on a petal-strewn floor. The headline across every feed proclaimed them the cruelest couple of the year. Each share, each comment stung them more than any legal blow could. Meanwhile, Elmwood Engineering's stock report for the day flashed on my phone, in bold red numbers. The ticker was bleeding. Shares had taken a sharp 30% plunge. By midday, another 15%. The company I once funded, built from seeds of my struggle, was collapsing under the weight of scandal and the fallout I had orchestrated. Investors who had been lined up like vultures turned tail, pulling funds, dumping shares. Online trading alerts flashed. Elmwood's stock down 45%, limits hit. A few loyal hedge funds attempted rescue, but their efforts flopped when top-tier clients began withdrawing. At an afternoon media briefing held by Elmwood's temporary board, the chair announced that Michael had been removed from his executive role, effective immediately. Officially, he was stripped of any votes. The phrase that hit me most was when an investor representative said, "We can't recover from this kind of reputational collapse. We need new leadership." It was a public execution, a quiet, cruel one. I stood back, watching, while my heart kept its quiet beat. They had made me nothing, but now they would be nothing. By evening, news circulated that Jessica, once eyed as a rising social media spokesperson and lifestyle influencer, had had her PR contracts canceled. Not just one, but 3 major beauty campaigns dropped her profile overnight. "Former groom's wife removed from campaign," the headline screamed. Another piece headlined "From glamour to ghosted, style influencer disappears after wedding tragedy." One demanding voice emerged from the online crowd like a hammer. "She cut her mother-in-law's love to pieces, now karma's cutting her back." That caption became a photo overlay on stills from the viral video, Jessica's golden scissors hovering over the handkerchief, reposted thousands of times across Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, TikTok. By night's end, the hotel bar was empty. The staff who had once served them stripped the linens. The cake was half melted in the humidity. The floral arrangements drooped, destroyed. Michael sat at the far corner table, eyes lifeless, at the same table we had planned for photos just hours earlier. I walked past, the hush of the tattered hall on my shoulders, collecting bits of ribbon and petals like a gardener cleaning up after a storm. I met Michael's gaze for a second. His lip trembled. He opened his mouth, maybe to protest, maybe to beg, but nothing came out. No apology, no plea, just the soft hum of overhead fans as they landed on us, 2 survivors of different wars. Jessica tried to stand, but her knees buckled. She sank, posture broken. I stayed still, watching. It wasn't pity, it was restitution. Restitution born of countless nights I had turned out the lights and cleaned the kitchen after she'd dismissed my cooking. I remembered the anguished tears after she called me low class, after I held the phone with that phrase echoing in my ear like acid. In that moment, all of it gathered behind my spine, a reservoir of late-burning strength, and so I whispered into the hush, so soft that no one else heard. But Michael did. "I always was your backbone," I said, "but not your target." He closed his eyes. The shame was there, raw and real. The next day, I woke to headlines splashed across the news websites. Elmwood stock tanks after insider coup. Bride loses influence after scandal. Mother-in-law reclaims power, rewrites legacy. Even the local news station ran a story titled, "When a Handkerchief Can Change a Company." They circled the hall, showed photos of the shredded cloth, the empty pillars, and the framed sign that had once announced Michael and Jessica, above petals now in sad bouquets. But I wasn't watching that. I was back in my small kitchen, where dawn light slanted through the curtains. Lily was small and asleep on the couch. I held my posture straight, hands still dusted with flour bits, and I felt release. They had spent a lifetime trying to erase me. Now the world could see what they left behind. I folded the papers with deliberate care, each crease a promise, each signature a vow. The legal documents, freshly notarized, transferred every asset I had reclaimed to Lily, my granddaughter, who, at 14, had more compassion in her fingertips than the rest of the world had shown me in a lifetime. She was the only one who had once slipped a stale piece of bread under the door when Jessica and the others locked me out. That quiet act of kindness stayed with me through years of being erased, silenced, ignored, and now it defined my future. I stood in the quiet study, the morning light softening the edges of the devastation outside, and I called her name. Lily entered shyly, wearing her backpack tilted slightly off-center. She'd been coming home from school. Her eyes widened when she saw the folder in my hands and the intensity in my posture. "Grandma," she said softly, and her voice trembled in a way that made me want to hold her tight and never let go. I beckoned her forward, and the weight of the documents felt lighter, somehow, knowing they'd become her inheritance. Not just in money, but in legacy, in truth. I handed her the folder, watching as her fingers brushed mine. She opened it with trembling hands, and her breath caught, and she looked up at me, eyes shimmering. "I never forgot you, Grandma," she whispered, her voice thick with all the memories she'd kept quiet for me. I felt tears burn behind my lids, but I swallowed them. I knelt so I could be level with her, so that she would know that in her I stood not broken, but reclaimed. "It's okay, sweetheart," I said, my voice steady. "You never had to prove your love to me. I didn't lose a son. I found a granddaughter." She threw her arms around me with such intensity that my heart nearly burst. I held her like I'd held Michael the night he was born, when I vowed I would give him everything I had, no matter how small. Only this time, I didn't feel defeated. I felt whole. I felt anchored. We sat there on the edge of my couch, the folder open on our laps. Lily flipped through the pages. School transcripts, a modest house deed, a trust fund names polished, each asset now legally hers. She paused at each item, her eyes reflecting the sheen of futures now possible. College tuition, a safe university apartment, maybe a small studio to paint in. I let her absorb it in silence. There is power in silence when it holds space for healing rather than erasure. I told her stories then, not of lawsuits or reversals of fortune, but of our village, our roots. Of the nights before Michael's birth, of how I lay awake remembering my husband's laughter. How I prayed for this child I held inside me, how I weathered years of nursing shifts and cold dinners so that someone could have options I never did. Lily listened, her head tilted, absorbing history that belonged to both of us now. "Your grandmother raised your mother too," I said softly. "In a way we never speak of, not now." She nodded, and I saw understanding in her gaze, recognition that legacy is both gift and responsibility. Lily traced the lines on one document, an agreement specifying that the assets could not be liquidated until after her college graduation, unless for health or education emergencies. She looked up, eyes wide. "Grandma, this means I'm safe. No one can take this away?" I smiled, but my voice had the gravity she needed to hear. "No, darling, no one can. This is yours, and I will stand here until you're ready to use it." We leaned back together on the couch. She pulled her knees to her chest, and I draped a blanket over us. Outside, the sky was pale blue, fragile with dawn light breaking through clouds that had felt too dark for too long. I let myself relax for a moment, just to be here with this girl who had seen me at my lowest and still loved me. Then she asked, quietly, "Will you help me pick a university?" And I realized then that motherhood had expanded, shifted. I was no longer the woman scrubbing floors in nursing scrubs or mapping savings accounts to pay bills. I was now the architect of her future. In her eyes, I saw both the boy I lost and the person she might become. It was redemption, not from something broken, but from a legacy reborn. "The Netherlands?" I teased gently. Lily laughed and reached out to adjust my shawl. She made me warm, not just from proximity, but from knowing I had done right by someone who believed in me before she knew who I really was. We spent that afternoon reading through course brochures and websites. She talked about the kind of university she dreamed of, one with art studios and planetariums. I nodded and showed her pictures of our old home, the garden in spring, the patch of sky we used to watch for satellites when she was learning names of stars. I told her about the handkerchief, now framed under glass in my room. Ripped, yes, but still beautiful, a symbol of what was broken and what we built on its bones. Later, she asked if I'd tell her more stories of when I was young, when she could hold my hand while I talked, and I saw how much it mattered to her. To be seen by someone who could see her so clearly. I told her about my own grandmother, the woman who taught me how to stitch, who held my finger when I first learned to sew names on quilts. Lily traced my fingers as I relayed the story, and I felt the vivacity of 2 generations stitched into one. My legacy was not lost. It was evolving in this child, here in my arms. When night came, I tucked Lily into bed in the guest room that had been her playroom. She looked up at me, sleepy but bright-eyed, and said, "I'm proud to be your granddaughter." My throat bulged. I didn't answer. I just kissed her goodnight. Later, I lay in my old bed, the house finally quiet, not empty. I felt something I hadn't in a long time, a future, seated and unfolding beneath the soft hum of closed blinds. And I knew this. I had traded erasure for endurance, betrayal for belonging, abandonment for ancestry. Michael might have carved himself a shadow of empire and now lay beneath its rubble, but Lily would build a future I could be proud of. Here, tonight, the foundation was rebuilt. It was made from broken threads redeemed by love, And in turn, love had found a home. We moved into a modest house on a quiet street in Michigan, one with pale blue siding, a porch just wide enough for 2 chairs, and a garden that waited for our footsteps to coax it awake in spring. I chose it because for the first time in my life, I could choose for comfort, not necessity. Every morning, Lily and I share tea on that porch, sunlight filtering through maple leaves, laughter just at the edge of what words can hold. Our home is warm, not grand, but it is ours. It is full of the hush of new beginnings and the slow hum of safety. Inside, I refurbished the living room myself. Sandpaper and paint, careful strokes rediscovering old muscles I thought had gone to spite. Now the walls wear soft pastels, like the morning sky, and the furniture is mismatched, honest. Between the couch and the bookshelf, I placed a framed glass box. Across its backing, in lines and crosses of fraying thread, the leftover bits of that handkerchief lie beneath glass. It is no longer ripped symbolism. It is reclaimed memory, a reminder that what was torn can still hold meaning if stitched with intention. That frame sits center stage of our home, a quiet declaration: I survived, and beauty can emerge from brokenness. Sometimes Lily touches it softly, as if reading a text that says, grief does not define us, but how we rise does. Days pass in gentle patterns. I spend mornings at my desk converting the remainder of my reclaimed assets into a scholarship fund for girls who, like me, were overlooked but full of potential. I call it the Phoenix Scholarship, marked by a modest logo of a rising flame, and I see in it a chance for redemption, for restoration. Each application tells the story of a girl afraid she is unwanted, and I make sure each feels seen. Lily helps me with the paperwork sometimes. She sits at the dining table with her geometry book open, helping me compare essays, reminding me that faith comes from both dreams and perseverance. When I watch her, I see the warmth of connection where once there was only aloneness. I see hope. One evening, when summer light filtered in rivers of gold through linen curtains, Lily found me pressing a dried wildflower into a page of my journal. She looked up with a gentle worry. "Grandma, are you still sad?" she asked, her voice small yet unwavering. I paused, setting the flower aside and smoothing the leather cover with my fingertips. I looked into her bright eyes, so clear and unapologetically present. I took her hand and smiled, as if understanding the depths behind her question. "No, sweetie, I'm finally free." I pressed a kiss to her forehead. She nodded, satisfied, and bounded away to finish her homework, her steps light, holding a world more generous than the one that raised me. Beside my bed sits a small stack of notebooks, letters I never mailed to Michael or Jessica. Some start with, "I forgive you," others end with, "maybe someday." But tonight, I realize I need no more writing for them. My story no longer includes them. This afternoon, as the cicadas began their summer anthem, I finished a letter to the first scholarship recipient, a girl whose poem reminded me of resilience in language I once thought lost. I sealed it with a cedar leaf I pressed from our garden, and I thought, this is the story I will send into the world, a story of someone interrupted, who stood and wrote her truth, on quiet pages and sunlight. Later, I'll sit by the frame and whisper again. They erased me from their story, so I wrote a new one, without them. And I will mean it, not with bitterness, but with the clarity of truth and the gentle weight of purpose. If this story touched something deep in you, if you've ever been overlooked, underestimated, or erased, know this. Your silence was never weakness, it was patience. And your time is not over. I've lived long enough to know that justice does not always come with applause. Sometimes it comes with a quiet signature, a whispered goodbye, a new beginning. If you want more stories like this, real stories, from women who have lived every word, then subscribe to Grandma True Stories. Hit that bell so you never miss when the quietest woman in the room finally speaks.